it was a couple of years of like, like having no place to live, and I slept, I had a home behind a dumpster for a while. I slept in crawl spaces in hotels. It was like pretty much just doing drugs, all the time, and doing whatever I had to get my drugs, hustling, things I regret, and at one point I remember I found a house in Venice Beach, California, and it had been burnt, and it was scheduled for demolition, and so I snuck around it, and I was trying to find a place where I could break into the house, and around back there, it was like boarded up. I found my way in, and I remember crunching through like 6 inches of ashes, through this house, and in the middle of the house there was a room, and I kicked this door open, or there was a door, and I kicked the door open, and I go in this door, and it's like there was one room in the middle of the whole house that was like not burnt, and I ended up living there for like 3 months, and during the night, I would go through the ashes, and I would see what, find stuff, One night I was digging through the ashes, and like 6 inches under the ashes, I find something, and I pull it out, and it was a peacock feather. It was a peacock feather that, it was like a foot long, but it was like completely perfect condition. And I was like, how could this be? How could I find a feather in a house that was completely torched? And it was like it was a symbol of like that we're in a dream. Like this experience in life is a dream, and anything is possible. And it was also what I took away from it was that no matter what happens to you in this world, no matter how burnt, you become, there's a place, at the center, that you can go to that's maybe in your heart, and that was what the room represented, and the feather was just, there's something that nothing can touch,
In our culture, we tend to live in the moment. As a historian, I'll tell you the only thing that's inevitable is change. Right? If I were writing a book a century ago about the end of empires, people would have said, "You're crazy. Empires are the way of the world. They'll always be with us." Within a generation, the major empires had fallen. It was neo-imperialism, but still, the empires had fallen. If I were writing a book about the civil rights movement in the 1940s or 50s, people would have said, "You're crazy. Jim Crow segregation, that's always going to be with us." Within a generation, with the Civil Rights Act. If we were writing a book about women's suffrage at the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century, they said, no, this is, forget it, that's pie in the sky. Within 2 decades, women had the right to vote. Or the Berlin Wall coming down, caught the CIA off guard, right? The only thing that's inevitable is change, and sometimes it's even for the better. That's the lesson of history. And so I think the drug war it's an anomaly, it's a social experiment, and it's coming to an end. And when that tipping point happens, I think it'll happen rather quickly. And I think our politicians, though they're very terrified of this issue, are essentially herd animals. There's something even more that they're terrified about, which is being left out. And so when the herd begins to move, when the conventional wisdom begins to change, I think you'll see first a gradual and then a rapid stampede away.
In general, you want to be a politician, you got to tell people a story that resonates with their experience, which is one of exploitation and being screwed. You also can't run on being like, hey, it's a sunny day. Like, what's your problem? Like, that doesn't get you elected. It's like, you got to have solutions, right? Politicians have solutions. Well, solutions to what? You got to have problems. They're either the real problems, which are like racism, class exploitation, despoilation of the environment, sexism, all of these things, or you got to have some other set of problems that you have a solution for, which are invented, which are like that there's like, Osama bin Laden is under some rock, that there are like crackheads everywhere who are gonna like break into your house and like kill you or whatever it is, you know, like there's like enemies out there and I'm standing between you and them, right? So that I think is the main reason that there isn't a mass legalization of drugs. Is like, I mean, this is very functional politically.
The saner policy is for we as a democracy to shape the laws so that the police can enforce sane laws, not to blame them. You know, they're not the ones that I would say, you know, that they're doing what they're trained to do. They're doing what society asks them to do. The people that are violating the law, we all know. When I smoked weed in high school, I knew I was breaking the law. If I got busted for it, I'd have blamed myself. My dad certainly would have blamed me. So that said, the consequences you talk about are not good for society. And so the real issue is, it's not for the police to change it. It's for us as members of the democracy to look at the facts, to look at them as objectively as possible, to look at real world issues, both in the United States, where we repealed prohibition and what happened afterwards, and also in other countries that are first world countries like ours and what has happened there.
Most people who do a significant amount of time in prison just want to forget about the experience. Even not a lot of time, they just want to forget about it and go on with their lives. Very rare you have people that want to deal with the issue that affect people in prison, want to go on rescue missions like myself to save people in prison, want to fight the laws that are wrong and should be changed. See, because of the budget crisis now, many states, like the state of California, 40,000 people mandated to be released. 67% of those incarcerated return within 3 years under the federal stats. So they're coming out less prepared into a society that's not ready to take them because there's no money to have programs to help these people.
I just talked to a brilliant guy from Penn who's doing his postdoctorate. Brilliant young guy. And he told me that, remember he said that addiction came about, the word addiction was starting to be used around 1905, just as urbanization was really starting to build up. It is a symptom of the modern era, which is the thing that none of these programs address. Once we start saying, let's look at drugs as a health issue instead of a criminal justice issue, I think we're stepping into dangerous territory, because most drug use, the vast majority of drug use, is neither. It's neither. When you break into someone's house, it's a criminal justice issue. When someone contracts HIV or hepatitis C or tuberculosis, it becomes a public health issue. But the rest is about what? Personal choice. And that's what gets scary to people. That's what the power structure does not want to have, including our well-meaning liberal friends.
You know, my dream is that there's some sort of universal drug scheduling that really makes sense. Let's have a really honest, accurate assessment of the risks and the harms and the dangers that are associated with these different drugs. And I also think that, you know, people need to out themselves a little bit about what their use is. I mean, you know, I feel a little bit like Harvey Milk, you know, with the gay rights issue, but I'm like, you guys aren't going to get your rights until you stand up and say you deserve them. You know, there's millions of pot smokers who are hiding, who aren't coming out and saying, you know what, I pay my taxes and I go to my PTA meetings and I also like to smoke pot sometimes. And, you know, I don't want to have to hide anymore.
Many of us, millions of us, are people who, you know, for marijuana has been a friend to us in our lives. Psychedelics have played an important role in our intellectual or spiritual development. And we can't stand the fact that we're being treated as criminals. But then we're also the people who have been, you know, seen the worst of drugs, people who have addiction running throughout our families, people who have lost a kid to an overdose, people who have, you know, have relatives in drug treatment, people who for whom marijuana was the gateway drug, which did lead to other drugs, right? People who really wish we could have a drug-free society, but who have come to the conclusion that we're never going to have a drug-free society, have come to the conclusion that the war on drugs did nothing to protect our loved ones or ourselves, and come to the conclusion that addiction is best handled as a health matter, not a criminal matter. We're the people who you know, don't really see ourselves as drug users. I mean, maybe we have our coffee in the morning and a glass of wine in the evening, maybe our wife's on Prozac and our kids on Ritalin and our father's, you know, taking Viagra, you know, but we don't really see ourselves as drug users, right? But what we do care about is we care about the Bill of Rights. We care about preserving basic freedoms in America. We care about human rights, you know, around the world. We care about the devastation that's going on in Mexico with prohibition-related violence. We care about curtailing the powers of police and not turning America into a police state. We care about basic economic sense. We care about the government not throwing taxpayers' money down a sinkhole on a drug war that just can absorb unlimited amounts of money without accomplishing anything. We care about the racism and racial disproportionality that happens with the drug war. We care about protecting basic privacies. We care about common sense. We care about grounding public policy in science and wisdom. You know, we care about treating other drug addicts the same way we would want drug addiction treated if it was happening in our family. And so what the Drug Policy Alliance is, we are truly the people who love drugs, the people who hate drugs, and the people who don't give a damn about drugs, but who believe there's got to be a better way to deal with drugs in our society.
You know something? We're all on the same side of this question. We all want to reduce drug abuse and all the crime and misery that goes with it. We may have different views as to how to get there, but let's stop yelling at each other and let's just start putting our heads together and coming up with something that works. Because the war on drugs, literally, drug prohibition is the biggest failed policy in the history of our country, second only to slavery. So we can't do anything worse than what we're doing today. Let's put our heads together and come up with something that has to be better.